破壊的イノベーションで有名になられた方でありまして、
we think is going to generate revenues.
Can you please give us a few examples, good examples of disruptive innovation that are changing our world as we live today?
Another example of the convergence between technologies includes sequencing data, genomic sequencing data. So DNA, RNA, proteins. So that sequencing data and artificial intelligence combined with CRISPR gene editing is going to cure many diseases. The first trials of CRISPR-Cas9 have concluded, and the US, the UK, and the European Union have approved cures for 2 blood-related diseases, sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. And just to give an example of one man, the first man in the beta thalassemia trial, before the doctors were able to isolate the mutation, what had gone wrong in his genome, he used to have to go into the hospital on average 17 times per year on an emergency basis for blood transfusions. Since his genome was edited, this was more than roughly 4 years ago, he has not gone into the hospital once. So cures. And one of the diseases that we believe will be cured by this convergence between sequencing technologies, AI, and CRISPR gene editing is diabetes. CRISPR Therapeutics, one of the companies in our flagship portfolio, it believes, the CEO believes, that not only will this combination of technologies be able to cure diabetes, but also potentially cancer.
How long are we talking about to make it happen?
Yes, well, I think that the cures, now that the trials for sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia have gone so well, the biggest concern was safety. When we edit the genome, will we miss and cause what's called off-target effects? So far, so good. Now we are seeing many more human trials associated with CRISPR gene editing. So I think it's a matter of, for diabetes, I think within 5 years, that we will make a great deal of progress. And I wouldn't be surprised, given the results from sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia, I wouldn't be surprised to see a cure within the next 5 years.
Could you please give us one more example?
Sure. Well, I think that I gave the example of robotaxis, but with humanoid robots, which, of course, Tesla with Optimus is going after, that we're probably, if you think about robots, I gave you robotaxis, but all robots are the convergence of the hardware, the robots itself, battery technology, so energy storage, and AI. And they are going to be able to take away from people very mundane work, the tedious work, and elevate people, help them more productive. They will oversee the humanoid robots, so wages can go up, and we believe that that the number of hours that people will need to work per week is actually going to go down. Now, we saw this in the early 1900s, when automobile and electricity and telephone were all evolving at the same time. So 3 platforms back then, 5 platforms now. And what you saw was the work week coming down. On farms, people used to work 7 days a week. Then, of course, we moved to 6 days a week with tractors and more productivity there. Then 5 days a week during the Industrial Revolution. And, it's interesting. During COVID, many people learned that working remotely was possible. So now here in the United States, many people, and this is true of ARC as well, our firm works 4 days in the office and 1 day remote. It is possible, as these technologies evolve, that we go down to a 4-day work week. We shall see.
Current Tesla's FSD, how good is that? I mean, is autonomous driving ready, or they need some more improvement?
So the FSD, which I know is not available in a lot of countries, but is available here.
Right.
I think regulators around the world are being cautious on this, but it is available here. And we can tell with each upgrade, and they're now happening in weeks. So from FSD 12.1, 12.2, 12.3, there has been a step function improvement. We can tell how much of a better understanding of our roads generally that Tesla has, and is able to handle so many more corner cases than it was even 3 months ago. So yes, we're with each version, and I said now there are weeks between versions, we're seeing major improvements. Of course, the regulators here in the United States will have to agree. And the good thing about this movement is there's so much data to prove that we're almost there.
We have tried Tesla's FSD in Seattle before we came here, and we are very much impressed. So.
Yes.
And how super is the Tesla supercomputer?
Oh, my goodness. It's one of the biggest supercomputers in the world. Tesla has, and Elon with his new XAI company, he wants to put together clusters of GPUs bigger than anyone else has out there. I think 100,000. I think Meta Platforms right now has 35,000. It just gives you a sense of how big his plans are, not just for the transportation industry, but also he has space, he has X, in which he hopes will become the everything app, much like WeChat Pay scaled in China and throughout Asia. He started in the payments industry. And so I think he's going to return to the payments industry as well.
You mentioned SpaceX. How important is SpaceX for Tesla?
Well, I think each of the companies is using AI, and
it's complementary.
Very complementary. And also from a supplier point of view, Tesla, SpaceX, and Boring, and maybe even Neuralink, they all need to be supplied with GPUs. So Elon Musk's bargaining power with the supplier ecosystem is going up as well.
ARK インベストのフィンテックとゼロコンタクトファンドのですね、アナリストでいらっしゃいますニックさんとフランクさんにお越しいただいています。Can you first explain to us what's a fintech and also zero contact?
Sure. Yeah, so when it comes to fintech, what we're primarily focused on are digitally native financial companies. So companies that aren't established in the traditional world order in the banking system, where you have brick and mortar legacy businesses, and there's a lot of friction in transacting with those businesses and banks. What we're seeing now is this new norm within the financial world of digitally first companies, offering digitally first and digitally native products within the financial world. And we talked about Block's Cash App, but we're seeing the proliferation of digital wallets across many different companies. And we see this as being able to address consumers where they are, and that's online. And so that is why we think that the fintech opportunity is going to be so large in the coming years, because this is where the new consumer is. They're living online. And this is also why we're so focused on the zero touch portfolio and opportunity, because consumers are spending more time than ever before online. We're seeing them spend almost 39% of their time in front of screens. And so we need to be there as investors and researchers to understand how consumers and businesses are using this new online world and building opportunities for it. So when we look at the zero touch opportunity, what are we talking about? We're talking about e-commerce, social commerce, social media, digital advertising, all of these emerging businesses and revenue streams for companies that are specifically happening online.
Can you please explain to us why those two themes are very important?
Absolutely. So between fintech and zero touch, we're seeing a ton of convergence and a ton of emerging opportunity for these global powerhouses, these companies that we're invested in, to really build out opportunities both on the consumer side and the enterprise side. And so when it comes to fintech, what we're seeing is digital wallet players and companies innovating in the fintech space being able to grow beyond anything that was previously thought of. And we're seeing them tackle both the consumer side of fintech and the enterprise side, more on the B2B side, but under one unit. So when we look at a Block and Square under Block, when we look at Shopify, Toast, some of these companies pushing the boundaries within fintech, we see ample opportunity and growth from their core businesses, but also to offer new businesses. So when it comes to Square, what they're building is a closed loop payment system. So being able to develop and transact only through Square's rails and ecosystem. This is going to cut out a ton of middlemen and costs and create enormous opportunities for a company like Block that owns Square. And I'll pass it to Frank now to just touch on some of the public blockchain aspects of both Block and Coinbase.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Very important theme for the fintech strategy is digital assets. And that's because of the opportunity that we see with public blockchain technology. Both cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and smart contract platforms like Ethereum, we think have the power to drive a monetary and financial revolution. You can think of this technology as enabling us to remove traditional centralized counterparties, which can reduce the amount of steps between a transaction, take out middlemen, and reduce fees and reduce risk in that process. And we think that's some of the use cases that Bitcoin and Ethereum provide. And we're very interested in the strategy to have companies that have exposure to this opportunity. Nick was talking about Block. Through their Cash App, they allow users to purchase, custody, and spend Bitcoin, which we think is the digital asset with the largest total addressable market, as it replaces it gives an alternative to traditional central banking, and happy to dive into that in more detail, as well as Coinbase, which is the premier digital assets exchange in the US, which we think is very differentiated from the pace of innovation in the products that they're rolling out. They've diversified the business from just a trading platform to include staking, payments, and some critical blockchain infrastructure that we think is very differentiated, that sets them apart from many of the competitors in the space. And as a pure play company focused on digital assets, they seek to benefit, or they could benefit most from a rise in digital asset pricing over the rest of this decade.
Explain to us how these teams will change our world, say 10 years out from now. The things that we don't have now, but things we'll be experiencing in 10 years.
I could talk about maybe the enterprise side, and then Nick can talk about the consumer side. But I think a core theme that we look at within Zero Contact, we think about that as really removing friction from our day-to-day lives, both at work and at home. And artificial intelligence, we think...
Explain removing friction.
So I'll give an example of something that's occurred in the past, which is automation in factories. where you had at the turn of the century, the early 1900s, the invention of the assembly line, which dramatically reduced the amount of manual labor and cost and time to produce automobiles. And that was an invention that dramatically increased the productivity of employees working in factories. And we've thought the world has thought for some time that that would keep getting better, but the jobs of doctors and lawyers and accountants, what we generally call knowledge workers, were out of reach for our current technology to automate. And what we're seeing with generative AI, tools like ChatGPT, that we have the potential to automate knowledge work for the first time. And we think that's
automate knowledge work.
Yes, exactly, to automate knowledge work. So a great example is software development, which is a field that has been labor constrained. And these generative AI tools are able to solve coding problems 2 times as fast for developers. And they're only getting better in terms of the number of tasks they can complete and the speed. And we think that throughout the rest of this decade, these tools will become paired with every worker to make them better and faster and more productive.
How is this new generative AI is impacting your themes?
I can start off on the consumer side within Zero Contact. What we're seeing with generative AI is a new era in the way that we are going to create content for online. And so this spans across text, photo, video, and maybe the most important, video gaming. What we think is going to happen is with these generative AI tools, creators that are building on user-generated platforms like YouTube, Roblox, Instagram, all of these social media companies, it's going to become seamless to create content. And then when you apply that to the gaming space, when you think about AAA publishers, the big gaming companies out there building, massive video games, it takes many years to develop these games, and they typically cost hundreds of millions of dollars. What we're seeing with companies and platforms like Roblox and Unity is being able to offer tools to individual game developers that's going to lower the barrier for creation and the cost for creation to help proliferate the space and create an enormous amount of video gaming content, experiences, games. And this is going to bring in more users. So we're starting this flywheel effect of bringing in creators and developers, which ultimately bring in more experiences, which then in turn bring in users. And all of this means more revenue for the platforms as they develop advertising, direct monetization. All of this is happening today within the companies that are in the Zero Contact portfolio, specifically with Roblox and Unity. These are gaming companies that are pouncing on the opportunity when it comes to generative AI. Not to mention the social media companies that will benefit from this as well, when individual creators can create video faster, text faster, and photography faster as well.
So generative AI has strengthened your case.
Absolutely. Yeah, what we've been witnessing in artificial intelligence is an extremely powerful cost decline, which is a very important component of our research. That helps us understand when technologies are ready for prime time, when the costs are falling fast enough that they can be distributed to millions or billions of people. And we're seeing that now. ChatGPT was the fastest application ever to reach 100 million active users. And it's being infused, these AI models are being infused into every software product that we use today. And I'll give a few examples of companies that we think are really well positioned here. UiPath, for example, is a automation company that helps to automate mundane workflows within organizations, whether it's finance or accounting. They are able to, with AI, automate more processes and move into departments that they previously couldn't work with. Marketing or sales organizations is a great example. And then additionally, we think Palantir is a company very well positioned as a pure play in the AI space because it is a best-in-class data integration platform. And data is critical both for training models and making them useful in production. And Palantir's platform allows companies to aggregate their data assets, and then make them useful to models. That really allows models to be integrated into a company. And we think their ability to kind of sell their platform is dramatically increased because of AI. And then lastly, there's companies that benefit from just a proliferation of software. We're going to have more software, it's going to be cloud-based, and it's going to become increasingly complex. So a company like Datadog that has a platform for monitoring applications in the cloud, the demand for that is going to increase as we have more cloud services. Additionally, as the landscape gets more complex, there's more threats from a cybersecurity perspective. So companies like CrowdStrike and Cloudflare are going to do very well in this new world where we have a proliferation of software and increasingly sophisticated cyber threats.
How important is cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin for us? Please explain as you were explaining to your grandmother.
Yeah, it's very important, we think. And the reason why is because it is a new form of money that is native to the internet. And that's the really important part because we have not had that before, something native to the internet. And that means it has really interesting properties. It can be transmitted anywhere in the world globally in a second. It can be custodied by an individual, or you can use a company like Coinbase to custody the asset for you. And it can be, it has a very predictable monetary policy. So whereas the central government and the central bank is deciding when to print money, Bitcoin's monetary policy is fixed and deterministic. It has a very known supply. And that gives it a scarcity value that you can't get from traditional fiat currencies as governments around the world increase their spending. And so we think because of these properties and because it is independent from any single government, that the demand for Bitcoin will increase into the future. Our expected value for digital assets as a whole by 2030 is $25 trillion. And you can get to there by a large part in offering an alternative to gold and some of the investment characteristics of gold, as well as increasing innovation in the financial services space, which is why you see this both in the zero contact strategy and the fintech strategy, exposure to digital assets. And I'll give an example of how digital assets are being used to kind of remove friction and reduce costs. Stablecoins are a digital native representation of the US dollar that have these similar properties to Bitcoin, where they can be transferred instantly, direct peer-to-peer. Last year, in 2023, Visa settled about $15 trillion in payment volume. MasterCard about 9, and PayPal about 2. Stablecoins already, very early in their adoption cycle, settled $10 trillion in volume. So that's more than MasterCard and more than PayPal, and getting up there with the likes of Visa. So these platforms are already operating at some scale today, and we think that because of this peer-to-peer nature and the ability to send money for less cost, peer-to-peer, that adoption will continue.
You said $25 trillion in 2030. What's the number now?
Right now, it's in between 2 to 3 trillion.
2 to 3 trillion.
I could find the exact one. Let me see. Oh yeah, 2.5. So that's good.
So one day in the future, the significance of cryptocurrencies would exceed that of fiat currencies?
I think that's a great question. We don't view Bitcoin as a replacement for fiat currencies. And I think it'd be silly to think that it becomes bigger than the US dollar in the near term. I think we're very early in a very long-term adoption cycle. And we see nations that have very unstable local currencies.
Like Venezuela.
Exactly, or Argentina, as the first to adopt Bitcoin. And we think that, for the bottom, not outside the top 20 countries, we will see Bitcoin adoption first. And then it be used as a strategic asset in the larger regions where it may not be used for day-to-day payments. I think, that's additional upside if it is, but we think purely its independent nature and sound monetary policy offers a strong alternative and a hedge that should be included in investors' portfolios. Not that it necessarily has to displace the dollar or for other foreign currencies.
It can almost be viewed as an insurance policy. In a case like Venezuela, where you have runaway inflation, holding some assets in Bitcoin can protect you from a scenario like what we're seeing in Venezuela.
So countries like Venezuela, Argentina adopt cryptocurrencies. That would affect the price of crypto.
Yes, exactly. So, and that's partly why the fixed monetary policy is important, because there is a scarce supply. So every new entrant into the market, new money in, needs to purchase the asset from someone else. And so inflows to the asset class create an increase in price because of that.
In your opinion, in the US, how much of the concept of Bitcoin is understood by among the Americans?
I think we're still pretty early. Coinbase has over 50 million Americans that have a crypto account. So there is some level of adoption, but understanding these intricate nuances is difficult, which is why I think it's good to keep talking about it and explaining it. And for, I think it's a big milestone to have Bitcoin ETFs available in the United States now, because financial advisors, who maybe are more informed than the everyday retail person, can put a small portion of their client's account into Bitcoin now for the first time. And they can help with that education and really embrace the asset class, which if you look over the past 5 years and you do an optimal portfolio assessment to see what position in your portfolio Bitcoin should be relative to major asset classes like stocks, bonds, commodities, gold, etc. Maximizing for risk-adjusted return, the optimal ratio of Bitcoin in a portfolio is between 4 to 5% on average. We don't think everyone is going to go there overnight, but if you only care about the statistics, that's what the statistics say. And we think advisors will learn that and take advantage of it in their client portfolios.
Maybe some people own Bitcoin because it's going up, or because everybody else is talking about it. But the fact is that not everybody understands the true significance of owning Bitcoin.
Yes, it's true that the asset class is partially because it is global in nature and freely accessible, is subject to speculative booms and busts. And I think that it's important to know about the asset, that it is highly volatile. We observe and we think will continue volatility decreasing over time as adoption increases. But investors should know that it will be volatile, both up and down, and manage it in a portfolio appropriately.
And ARK has a target price for Bitcoin.
Our 2030 target price is around $1 million. And that's really a factor of the largest component to that is Bitcoin assuming a market cap similar to gold, for example, which adds a certain amount to the Bitcoin price that is the majority of that $1 million price forecast. Another way to think of it, talking about kind of this adoption and money flowing into the asset, raising its price. The optimal allocation to Bitcoin that I mentioned, and I'm going to look it up in my notes really quick.
What's the price now?
It is 63, yeah.
63,000 going to $1 million. It sounds crazy. But you believe it's $1 million?
We do. Okay, so the number that I mentioned earlier, which is specifically 4.8%, the optimal allocation of Bitcoin in a portfolio based on trailing 5-year returns. On average. If 4.8% of global investable assets actually flowed into Bitcoin, that would increase the price by $550,000 alone. So just if those around the world looked at the optimal portfolio allocation based on the statistics and allocated 4.8% of the global investable asset base, that would add $550,000 to the price. So that gives us, you could almost say $1 million is an aggressive target, but that gives us some downside assurance that there is a lot of growth to happen between $63,000 now, a poorly understood asset, and this large amount of assets that could allocate into it.
Can you come up with some analogy as to where the Bitcoin now relative to that example?
It's a common example, but the early days of the internet where the use cases aren't clear to everybody and you may not know.
That was what,
Early 1990s, let's say.
90s,
yeah. Where you don't understand it, not everybody has it, not everybody knows what to do with it. And then you fast forward 20 years, for example, and now we have social networks. The value of having a billion people online and connected together created something, advertising, for example, that nobody thought of was possible. And we think similar innovations are possible with digital assets.
So do you have a target for longer time horizon?
We are more long-term investors than most out there, but we typically focus on the 5 to 10 year time horizon. So for now, we've shared our 2030 price target, but we update this analysis every year in our annual Big Ideas report that comes out in January. And so as we get closer to 2030, we'll share a 2035 vision eventually. But we're still on 2030 for now.
If and when Bitcoin reaches the maturity, everybody use it, what's going to happen to the price after that?
Yeah, I think we talked about it a bit already. And then I think it may trade more like gold trades today as a hedge, a risk-off asset. We've been doing a lot of thinking on this concept of Bitcoin being both a risk-on asset and a risk-off asset. This fixed supply, being an inflation hedge, being seizure resistant, not having to use a counterparty actually is very defensive in nature, similar to how investors view gold. And I think Bitcoin sometimes trades like that, but also sometimes trades like a very risk-on asset because it's a emerging technology and it is the embodiment of disruptive innovation. And I think those scales go up and down, but over time, in the long time horizon, beyond say 20 years, Bitcoin will likely transition where it's maybe more risk-on weighted now to being more risk-off weighted in the long term.
What would you say are the risks to your forecast? What could go wrong?
Well, there's a lot that can always go wrong. It's notoriously hard to predict the future. Our job is to try and do that as best as possible, and we're not always right. I think electric vehicles are a great example where our forecast was in the right direction, but the wrong magnitude. If you go back 5 years ago, we had a electric vehicle forecast that was bigger than anyone else out there by an order of magnitude. And we didn't get it exactly right. And in fact, COVID slowed down EV adoption and impacted that. But if you look at the actual numbers, and our director of research for autonomous technology would tell you the exact numbers, but we were more right than the consistent estimates. So we were right directionally. We didn't get the exact number right. And we don't think we're going to get the exact number right with all of these forecasts, but we try to be directionally right and position the portfolio for that.
So analogy is, how to think about it is, on a Coinbase, there's a trade taking place. Bitcoin, for example, Bitcoin trade is taking place on a Coinbase. It's like a stock trading on the New York Stock Exchange, for example, right? So as the volume of Bitcoin tradings or other cryptocurrencies increases, then Coinbase will benefit. Is that how one should think?
Yeah, that's a good analogy to use. And I think that it actually goes, well, that's the core of Coinbase's business today. It actually goes much farther than that. And that's why we think Coinbase is really interesting. So there's the trading element. What's different from traditional financial infrastructure as crypto is that New York Stock Exchange is the exchange, but there's a different custodian and different clearing firms. Because of the properties of digital assets in the current environment, Coinbase can do all three of those: exchange, custody, settlement, and clearing. So it's a vertically integrated solution for digital assets. That's within kind of this concept of being a trading platform and an ownership platform. But Coinbase is also an infrastructure provider for digital assets. And this is something that's relatively new for them, but is a really important emerging trend that already this quarter, they broke out a separate line item on their financial statements for it. And this is in what's called layer 2 scaling solutions for Ethereum. Basically, they're creating infrastructure that allows more people to transact on blockchains, and they earn transaction fee income from that. And so this is more similar to AWS, Amazon Web Services. creating a development platform that the entire world can build and experiment on, that Coinbase earns revenue from that activity as well. So you have this semi-traditional trading business that has some familiar analogies, but you also have these new areas like building a development platform that's more similar to Amazon Web Services in a new era of computing that Coinbase also competes in. And I think that's really important for understanding the Coinbase story. There's also, maybe this is a blurring between the two, but stablecoins. We talked earlier about the stablecoin volume last year being $10 trillion and that growing. Coinbase co-issues their own stablecoin, USDC, and they earn interest income from that. So this is a new age service that both competes with Visa and banks in offering a digital payment solution that also diversifies their revenue stream as well. And we think stablecoin demand, for some of those reasons we talked about earlier, will also rise. And Coinbase benefits from each of these three components of their business.
Well, Nick, Frank, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.